Our presenter gets to tell their story uninterrupted. And, they can go for 20 minutes, they can go for 30 minutes, they can go for 40 minutes. I'll cut you off after that, okay? But however long they go. And then when they're completed, I will ask for a minute of silence, and that's 60 seconds, and we'll just kind of let the story settle. And then there will be time for questions. However, the presenter always has the option whether or not to answer your question. So if they don't want to answer it, they don't have to. Or they can give a political answer, which is to change the subject to their talking point. Okay, just teasing. But I'm so delighted to introduce Bill Prange, home on the Prange, as our speaker.
Yes. Good morning, you all. I'm here under duress in a way. Well, I signed up for this thing. I could give my talk about being at Pearl Harbor, the attack, which I've given before, or maybe talk adventures in Europe and so forth. And then I talked to her. He says, "No, this is about your religious odyssey and spiritual odyssey." And I thought, I've been an agnostic all my life. I don't really have a religious odyssey, so I had to think about this very much. And I've come up with this, so we'll talk about it. Can you hear me back there? Good, good. Uh, I I have to refer. I'm 89. I have to refer to my notes, and so we'll do that if you don't mind. Anyway, this process has allowed me to really look back at myself and where I am in life and what my beliefs are. I'm 89 years old, man who's gay. I had a relationship with a partner for 51 years. He died 9 years ago.
Mm.
Both of us are from Hawaii. I spent 60 some odd years in Hawaii, which is my home. I'm an ex-surfer and ex-gardener and have had a completely different life than most of you have. And I'd like to talk about that, but we won't talk too much about it now. I have not had a religion, a great interest in religion. I've had the fleeting interest in sciences as a layman, just casual, not anything deep. And I think about such things as heaven and hell, which is part of the Christian doctrine. And I realize that perhaps right now would not be a good time to be in heaven, with rockets being shot through it, satellites going this way, and space junk going through at 17,000 miles an hour. It must be a very pleasant place to be in. So, and then on the other hand, I do follow volcanoes, and to date, none of the volcanoes have coughed up any bit of hell. So I'm beginning to doubt if there's a hell as well. So uh, I've been very interested in quantum physics uh, and that whole area, which is in great flux right now with this new Webb satellite. They're finding out all sorts of things that are going on. And I look back at my youth and when I was young, there was, well, looking back even further in terms of our religions, the great religions, Earth was considered the center of the universe, and the sun and the universe went around there. And it made almost sense that we would have a God that would be looking at us and doing it. Now we find that we're an insignificant star, a very small star in a galaxy of 200 to 400 billion stars, which is one of, according to this web thing, possibly one of a trillion galaxies out there. So we are very, very insignificant. And with that, I I have always been a non-believer. I'll go through this very quickly, and then I'll talk about my life otherwise. My principles are that man is an animal. We're the top of the heap, but we're an animal. And as an animal, uh, why should we have our own heaven? Does a cockroach have a heaven, or does a chimpanzee have a heaven, and so forth? I don't think there's reason to expect that there would be a heaven for us. Uh, and the other thing is basic philosophy: life is a crapshoot, and small things can change your life completely. Uh, my meeting with my partner, 51 years, was just happened to be talking to another couple, a straight couple who had this friend stationed in Japan, and he was visiting Japan with his sister. And from that chance meeting, I met my partner of 51 years. And I think if we look back in our lives, small things happen that seem insignificant at the time that would change your life completely. And I'll talk more about that maybe later. Uh, and life does not travel in a straight line because of that. Good things happen, bad things happen, and that's about it. So that's just my basic philosophy, which is about it. Uh, in terms of my life, I was born in 1934. My dad was in the Navy at the time on board the old Saratoga. That was one of the first flat tops, and they were stationed in Long Beach, but Saratoga spent much time in Hawaii. My dad fell in love with Hawaii. I was born in California, and at age 5 months, my dad sent for my mother and I when his enlistment expired, and we started to live in Hawaii. And my home was in Hawaii for the next 60 some odd years. Uh, we lived in Pearl City, which is a, a peninsula just under Pearl Harbor, with a view of the Middle Loch where the Pan Am clippers would land and take off. The Pan Am base was about 3 blocks from us. Uh, we did not have a view of the ships in the harbor. And the major ships were in Ford Island. And Ford Island was just by the U.S. or gained by the U.S. in the late 1860s during the Kingdom of Hawaii. There was a reciprocity agreement, and Hawaii gave Pearl Harbor to the Navy. And it was on Ford Island. That's why all the battleships were stationed around Ford Island. It goes back to the days of the monarchy. At the attack. Uh, anyway, we came to Hawaii and they built this house looking at the area there. And on December 7th, my parents were staying in the bedroom. They had just been to a party the night before, and uh, the thought during the party, the thought of possible war with Japan came up. They were Navy people; they wouldn't dare, so that was when they went to bed. So it was almost 8 o'clock, and my sister and I went out to porch to get the newspaper, and I looked up towards Schofield, which was about 15 miles away, and Wheeler Field, which was an army base, and a big plumes of black smoke coming up. So I said, "Hey," yelled to my parents, "Hey, there's a big fire up there." And they said, "No, no, 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 that's probably just a train." I said, "It's too big. Please let us sleep. We want to sleep in." And then within 2 minutes, boom, a plane came over right in front of us, and another plane came over. So they got up, and my mom says, "Look, we're having maneuvers. Isn't this great?" And they've even camouflaged the plane. So we spent the next few minutes waving at our planes. And pretty soon the place began to rock with explosions. We couldn't see the ships or anything. And they still could comprehend what was coming. And so they said, finally, let's go to Pearl Harbor to the ferry landing, and we can see the ships and watch these maneuvers. By then, I was scared to death. My sister was scared to death. My grandmother's like was, she was scared to death. So we stayed behind, and they went up to see the maneuvers and came back. I'll try to make this very quick. Uh, Mother came back, and Dad came back, and said, "We're being attacked by the Japanese. This is war, and we have to get out of here." By then, our house was rocking like this, and huge plumes of smoke were coming from Pearl Harbor. The fighter planes began to strafe our neighborhood. You could see them with their tracer bullets. Our house was the only house in the neighborhood that wasn't killed. We had neighbors a block away that were killed in their house. And we had in the basement on Sunday, where my grandma had her apartment, two American Japanese plumbers who were doing some moonlighting work for us. They had this little car with a canvas top, and they came out and saw what was going on. And they also went to the ferry landing to see what was going on. They were there for the entire attack. The car next to them was completely shot up. Their car was not touched. But so that's one thing. Anyway, they came back, and Mom said, "We've got to get out of here, uh, and let's pack up and go." So she got clothes and food and so forth. And where's Dad? Where's Dad? Well, he was in the bedroom. He wasn't living. Dad was taking his morning shower and shaved. Well, the house rocked, and shrapnel was rolling all over the place. And finally, he got out, and we started our trip. We lived in Waiao Street. Wai meaning water, and Ao meaning bath. Bathwater Street, I don't understand, but that was the name of the place. And we went up to Lehua Road, which was the principal road to take traffic out of Pearl City toward the mountains. Uh, there were a lot of people. Well, I was very poor. A lot of people didn't have cars, so they were along the side of the road carrying what was valuable, whether it's a bird cage or a picture or something like that. And we got through Pearl City, which was a principal town, and made a right-hand turn on Farrington Highway, which was the road around the island. And I looked up, and here these big bombers were coming over us. I thought, oh God, now we're going to be bombed. It turned out that these were B-17s, which were being ferried to Hawaii that morning. And their presence was, uh, there had been a radar station that had picked up blips coming in of the Japanese, and they reported to an officer, but he knew the planes were coming in from the U.S., so he assumed it were the B-17s. So that's why there was no reaction to these blips. Anyway, we got uh, to Aiea Heights Road. Aiea Heights Road goes up above Pearl Harbor, and went up, and there was a man on the road toward the top, waving us on, like saying that we were not Japanese. And so go this way. And the attack was still, first wave of the attack was still going on. We could see down below that the burning ships capsized, all was going on. And then the second phase attack came in. So we had to go into the garage and stay there until things quieted down. And then went out back outside. You could see this just terrible scene. We watched the Arizona burn for 3 days afterward. A horrible mess. And the Navy forbid us from going back. They introduced martial law, and the military ruled it from that point to the end of the war. And so we could not go back. But luckily enough, there was a house nearby with 5 bedrooms that was being rented by Marine officers, and they were out in the uh, field. So we were able to use a couple of their bedrooms, and we stayed up there for a couple of weeks with one trip down just to get food and then come back up. And that just changed our whole life. And I will go on much more than that. Um, so we were sent back to the Navy bought up the house, our house, from underneath us, condemned the home, and we had no place to go. So my mother, my grandmother, and a sister and I went to the mainland, stayed there for a year and a half, came back to Hawaii in 2000, in April of '44. Parents built a couple of homes. And eventually we ended up in Kailua and Windward Oahu. I eventually went to University High School, University of Hawaii. I graduated in 1956 and decided didn't want to be drafted, so I went to Navy OCS so I could see the world and was commissioned an ensign. And although I was not a scholar, I was a good quick study, and while I had been kind of a goof off in college and majoring in partying, surfing, and economics in that order, I did very well academically because I was a quick study. Anyway, I got my first assignment to see the world, and it was to Hickam Field in Honolulu, about 10 miles from where my parents lived. So I, I had a great time there for 4 years because I was surfing 2.5 days and working about 2.5 days. I failed to mention that when I was 11, I realized that I was somewhat different, and I didn't know how to act on that, but this was behind me. Uh, so after my 4 years in Hawaii, so I've got to get out of here. So I up for 2 more years to Japan. The station had a base in Kamiseo, which was a communications intelligence station, and I was sent out on two missions to submarine missions on the USS Tunny, which was the oldest hull in the fleet, and went off the coast of Kamchatka to do several things. One was to monitor communications of the Russian Navy to make sure that we hadn't been found out and to give warning of that. To collect telemetry from missiles being launched into the Kamchatka area by the Russians, to do several other things. We worked on minor code breaking and so forth. The ship was the oldest hull, and at that time, uh, they were supposed to be able to go down to 400 feet. And the captain didn't trust the hull, so he would only go down to 125. So we got in a storm, and we had a big on the back deck. We had a big module containing two Regulus missiles, which were worthless, but so it was top heavy. And a storm came in, and he went down to 125 feet, and we're taking 45-degree rolls in, in in there. And we stayed down and stayed down, and I was in the officer's mess, and the cigarette, the commanding officer and the executive officers were smokers and light up a cigarette, and within a minute they went out. The air became pretty bad, and we had to stay down. We couldn't risk going up because when a submarine capsizes, which could have happened, very unstable at the time, the ballast tanks don't have any covers on them, so all the air would go out of the ballast light, and you go down. And eventually, after a couple of hours, it was about 3 or 4 hours more, we calmed down a bit. We went up, get, got some air, went down, and came up maybe 6 hours later on. Anyway, that was one thing that happened. And then I also was in another mission to collect telemetry from the first Russian manned flight, Gagarin, off of southwest of Hawaii. So that was the other thing. I left, the Navy was going to, I was a reserve officer. This is between the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Naval was shedding all those reserve officer jobs. So I found out that I could not stay in the Navy and I was getting out. I had my friends again, Marv and Doug Muirhead, and talked about my plans. And he said, well, we have a friend that works for Pan Am and he's coming to Japan. And maybe you can meet him, show him Japan, and talk about working for Pan Am, was one of my thoughts of things to do afterward. And that didn't work out. There was some miscommunication. I didn't meet up with him. So I went back to Hawaii and got out of the service. called Mark and I got Mark's telephone number so I could talk to him about working for Pan Am. And we met, and that was it. And for the first time in my life, I was in love with a man and could act on it. The only problem is I carried a top secret clearance. I was still in the Navy, and had I been found out, I would have been discharged dishonorably, and it would ruin the rest of my life. And it was spooky as all hell. That love is such that you go charge ahead. Uh, Eventually, I, he went through at that same time a very disastrous marriage. He never should have gotten married, and that broke up. And one day he called me. I was staying in an apartment in Waikiki, and he said, "Bill, I need help. I can't afford to rent the rent on my place in Manoa Road. Would you come and live with me?" The rent was $75 a month, but I did anyway. And I moved in with him, and it took a long time for me to accept myself. I didn't want to be gay, but I was. And he was going through some problems with his ex-marriage, and we had probably 2 or 3 really difficult years that we had to get through. And after that, we sailed on. We always looked forward. Uh, we lived in Manoa for about 7 years. We built a home, well, had a home in a residential area on Leonard, Oahu. Found there was a vacant lot in a gated community called Haiku Gardens. We purchased that, and again, by sheer luck, we met a friend of Mar's family, a realtor. Says we don't know what to do with the land. So the contractor in from California, and this thing is to find an interesting piece of land, which we had, and work with the owners and design the place. And the owners have to help them build the place, and that happened. And so we met Don Stimson. He looked at the land, which had a beautiful view back of Haiku Valley, which was where the radio station was, with a large antenna going across that broadcast submarine broadcasts at low frequency that we picked up when we were off of Kamchatka. So there was, but a beautiful deep valley. And he designed this beautiful home, which we had nothing to do with the design. It was entered in the AIA competition in 1976. It was the top award with this fantastic home. It was small but beautiful. And we lived there for a while. I worked for Bank of Hawaii uh, during that time, for 23 years in administration. Uh, there was a lady there that was from Kansas, and she started as a clerk, and she was very, very bright, and she worked herself up from being a clerk to being the first woman vice president of the bank. And she had a daughter, and the daughter had a son. The daughter died of cancer, so she picked up uh, raising the son and did a good job. His name was Barack Obama.
Oh,
And she died, and her service was at the All Souls Church in Honolulu. She was a member of the All Souls Church in Honolulu.
oh, I
Isn't that
didn't know
amazing?
that.
Yeah. So uh, I was in the HR department. The junior white man, when EO came in, and they had to bring in women, so I was kind of pushed aside.
Hmm.
Marv and I had worked with 2 organizations. I worked with the Zoo Society, the Zoo Society, Marv with Special Olympics. We took all these 2 organizations which were failing at the time, and in 2 or 3 years we were able to get them on their feet. Um, and I was spending too much time taking care of the employee rather than my job. And I lost my dad and I went into a depression. Anyway, I realized I just couldn't stay at the Bank of Hawaii any longer. And Marv was working for the Chamber of Commerce. He was a national leader in his category of he was in memberships. He was a national leader in his for a city of our size. But we were not enjoying ourselves. And so we said, let's just sell this place, that's our equity, and we'll take off for a year or two and come back and find other jobs. So we sold our place and headed for Europe. We headed for London, so we asked a friend of ours, Hiroshi Dogami, who was a painter who had a gallery in Orlando, and said, "Do you have anybody we could use as a reference, just so we could talk to when we're in London?" And and so he gives the name John Codrington without explanation. And am I going too far? No.
You're fine.
Okay. And so we got to London, got settled down. We called John Codrington. He says, "Oh, you're friends of Hiroshi. Well, I want to meet you. Let's take a walking tour of London." He at my place. Well, his place was a Race and Favor cottage in Pimlico. Race and Favor cottages were the aristocracy would have homes or places that they didn't know what to do with. So they would give it to friends or people that had done great things for the country or other things uh, to grant them the use of these places during their life. And John Codrington his father had gotten this place from the Duke of Westminster, and he was allowed to take care of it. So we met at his place, and we went out on a walk, and we walked, and we walked, and we saw where the old Globe Theater was. We went to Clink Street, where the prison was, hence Clink Street, being thrown in the clink. Uh, and then across the bridge, we saw where the fire of London started. Anyway, we ended up, after walking 40 minutes, exhausted, having a sherry, as we always do. And he asked us, "Have you been to Parliament?" We said no, but we got tickets from the embassy to see the Tuesday debate when the Prime Minister's in the House of Commons. He goes, "Oh, no, 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 no. That's not saying Parliament." He gets on the phone and says, uh, "Jeffrey, this is John. I have these two fine American gentlemen. Would you do the favor of showing them Parliament?" And then he says, "What are you two doing?" Uh, "Yeah, we'll be there in 30 minutes." So where are we going? We're going to meet Jeffrey. Well, who is Jeffrey? Oh, he was my commanding officer. This is 38 years ago. And John turned out to be 87 years old at the time. And he was walking us off. He had two false hips and going strong. So who's Jeffrey? Well, he was my commanding officer in the trenches of Flanders during World War One. And we've maintained a friendship ever since. And he's the Earl Amherst. I said, "We can't go to meet an Earl like that. We're just looking, please, you know, street clothes." He said, "Oh, you damn Americans, of course you can." And so we got up to the place and knocked on the door. And here's this probably 5'3" or 5'4" short man with a green velvet uh, shirt and a cane anyway. He greeted us, and we had gin and tonics. And in the process, Jeffrey mentioned that he was really into theater. In fact, after the World War One ended, he went to New York and was a critic for one of the newspapers there. And but he was the third critic, so he didn't go to theater. He went to vaudeville. He knew he knew Cary Grant when he was still one. Yeah, Archibald Leach. He knew Mae West, who he thought was a cat's meow. He knew Jack Benny, and just all these people later became famous. And then he later left that to become one of the first commercial pilots. Anyway, these people were just fantastic. So Jeffrey showed us Parliament, and we met him at the gate where the Queen comes in for the opening of Parliament. This is her robing room. This is where she gets her crown. And we walked out to the floor of the House of Lords, and the session was about to start. So we sat on the floor of the House of Lords, right next to all the peers, and listened to the thing, the debate, which was about eliminating the blue laws, because in England at that time, they still had the blue laws where you could not do commercial business on Sundays. And it was a spirited debate, although it's great people were very, very polite with each other. And this Baroness came up and gave us very flowery thing about people there and so forth, and then came to, stab into the heart. So I said, "Do you people And there were 14 members of the Church of England there. It says, do you realize that you people that over the Church of England have a bookstore at Westminster Abbey that's open on Sunday? And then that went on and on. We saw that debate. And we went to the Piers uh, dining room and had lunch there. And we had just a full day at the place. And in the process, uh, Jeffrey said, I love theater, but I'm now 90. And it's just very, very difficult for me to get up and go by myself. And we said, well, we have a friend who is the office manager for the Strand Theater, and he can get us discount tickets or free tickets to both of the great plays there, or plays there, other than the big ones like Phantom of the Opera. And there's Jeffrey, if there's something you want to see, we'll find if we can get tickets. We'll come and pick you up, fly a taxi, and help you there, and so forth and so on. They said, well, in that case, you do that, and we will take you to one of our men's clubs. Men's clubs? What's this all about? Um, so this happened. He went one day and said, I want to see this play. We've got the tickets, and went to pick up Jeffrey and put him down, got him in a taxi, took him to the play. We helped him up the stairs, down the stairs, and went to the men's club. And he went to the Pratt Club. Well, it was the Pratt Club. It was the private club owned by the Duke of Devonshire, which decided who and who would not be in his club. And the deal was you went there and had cocktails with your group, and a bell would ring, and the common table, and you were obliged to sit next to somebody you didn't know and engage in conversations. So here's this boy, two guys from Hawaii, with our best clothes that we got. I had a tweed jacket that I got at Sears and Only you could see light through, polyester pants and scuff shoes. I sat next to this beautifully groomed man, probably in his 60s, and he politely asked me who I was. And I said, I'm from, where are you from? Honolulu. So what are you doing here? Well, we're here for an extended stay, but really enjoy seeing the sights, particularly the grand homes of England, because we have no comparables in Hawaii. I said, they're just beautiful, but I understand they're just terribly expensive to keep open. And I assume that there's a millstone against around the necks of the owners. He says, oh, that's interesting. So we just ended and went back to our group. I said, who was I sitting next to? Well, he's a Marquis's Sandwich. He owns Hatfield House, which was like one of the great homes of England, where Queen Elizabeth first was imprisoned, and that's where she learned that she was going to be queen. So that was one many foot in the mouth of things that happened to me. uh, and many, many other things happened. Well, all of a sudden, we're a level of society that most people don't get to see. And these two fellows, we had rented a mute cottage, and it was owned by Mute cottages that were the horses and staff for people in carriages, and the staff lived. And it was 3 story. Anyway, it was it was owned by an Australian couple, and they came to London for summers there when it was winter in Sydney, and so we were obliged to leave for 3 months. And I didn't want to go to the heart of Europe during that time because it's sweltering hot. I knew it was terrible, and I looked at a map and I said, Portugal is probably like California. It's about the same latitude, and it has a cold current that comes down from the north. And I bet it's very pleasant there. And I did some reading, and that was the case. So we talked to John Codrington, our friend. He says, "Oh, I have a friend. My banker is from Portugal, and you might talk to him." So this young man we met, he says, I have an aunt who has property in Lisbon and in Sintra, which we knew nothing about. and maybe you can talk to him. So we went to met with him. He says, well, my aunt has property in Sintra and uh, uh, Lisbon. And he showed me a picture of the place in the property in Central. Actually, he showed me us the swimming pool with a beautiful modern pool with statuary around and a view across the big ravine to the summer palace of the royalty. It looked like a factory, actually. It wasn't particularly pretty. And so we bid. We said we will release it for 3 months. I'm running out of time?
No,
Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay. Uh, so we signed up for it. We were there, Marv. We had taken a 2 week trip on a narrow boat on the canals. And Marv pushed the gates and pushed too hard and got two hernias. So before having to leave, he went in for surgery and had them fixed. But it was only 2 weeks later, we were on our way to Portugal. And we had this long drive and long drive. We finally got to Portugal, place in the afternoon. And Helena drove into the place, and here was this quinta, which was a small manor house. And Helena greeted us and showed us our villas. Well, she took us down to the villa. Our villa was the dark, dank, dust, musty servants' quarters below the house. It was miserable.
Mm.
And Mark went, this is not a villa. We've been duped. And blah, 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 blah. And well, if you don't want to stay here, I'll give you your money back. You just leave and so forth. I said, Marvin, please, this evening we can't do anything. Let's spend the night here and see what happens. So woke up in the morning and Marv woke up and says, oh, look out. Laundry's on the line there. It's just like the Portuguese in Hawaii. And look at the grapevines with all the grapes on it. Isn't this wonderful? So he did a 180, and eventually we established just a great relationship with uh, Helena. And we would go out to see her son, who was a bullfighter. Uh, uh, he wanted to buy a horse for $10,000. He wanted his mother to do this. Uh, and so we went to see that. Bullfighting is quite different there. The bull is fought from the horse, and the bull is not killed in the ring. It's not as quite as bloody. It's still pretty bloody, but not like it is anyway. And we just did wonderful things with her. One day she says, Bill and Marv, I'm having the Lord Warwick come. Oh, by the way, we got a piece of mail in our box, misdirected. It was to the Viscountess Contessa. So we realized that she was a Viscountess, Helena was. And she said, I'm having the Lord Warwick and his party. I'm entertaining them. And finding him very boring. And he was. And she has always been running around the place with grandkids, jeans, and went up there. And here she is, beautifully dressed in a silk dress and jewelry here and so forth and so on. And the guest star arrived. This is the Marquis and Marquesa, so and so. They're into Arab horses, and this is the Baron, Baroness, and so forth. And Marv was right to it. And I thought, I don't know these people. And so the party went on, and more people arrived. And Warwick arrived with his New Yorker hanger-ons. And finally, the car goes, put, 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 put. And it goes in the works, and this lady just in a silk dress, and Pearl came out. And Helena says, this brings her over and said, this is my best friend, Baba. And we've known each other for years. And I thought, well, here's somebody I can talk to. So I pulled her in the corner. And we sat and just had a marvelous talk. Unfortunately, one of the first question was, what do you think of aristocracy? And I looked back at something I'd gotten from Jeffrey, and I gave him his line. I think it's wonderful that people recognize people in the country that have done great things for the country in the arts, sciences, war, what have you. But I'm not too sure that should be passed on to the next generation. She said, oh, and then we continued on. And then she stops us stopped me and said, Bill, I want to kidnap you and Marv, and I'll show you my house. So she asked, I'll ask Helen if I can kidnap you. So Helena said, sure. So she said, I'll take you to my place, but I have to stay there. And because I'm going to have dinner with my mother, so I have to find your way back. So Marv got in his car and I got in her car 2 hours before we had dropped our muffler in the evening. And I looked inside the mirror. Here's Marv behind us with sparks flying behind for the muffler I was trying. I went through a lovely central with all its palaces and so forth into an large area of dark forest, and finally saw a big white wall, stucco wall, and we turned in back of it to a turnaround. And here were two things. The entrance to the house, there was a butler, and there was a sign, Consulate of Ghana.
Oh,
And I have to explain this now because I'm going to forget it. The reason that Helena had to rent out our space, she had vast properties, agricultural properties. When the Salazar, who was the dictator there, died, the communists took over for a brief period of time and started to take the lands of the aristocracy and give it to the tenant farmers. And Helena was one of the first persons to have that done. So she lost her income. Uh, Her husband, or her ex-husband, found out what was going on and arranged for Baba to be declared the consul to Ghana, and that protected all her lands from being seized. So
well,
that I have to explain. Anyway, we went in and had showed the lovely interior of the home and went out to the patio with statuary. And this is this is a family chapel. Boy, and this is the family chapel, and this is where my mother was laying the dishes. What's the mother's home, and then behind with her agricultural lands. So anyway, we had to stop, and she gave us said, "Oh, by the way, I'd like to show you. This is our home in Bavaria. It was called Palmersfelden, and it looked like bigger than Buckingham Palace. And it turns out she was married to a Bavarian count who descended a group of prince bishops who had a great competition in the 1700s who can build the grandest palace. Anyway, and then time we saw Palmersfelden, which was a disappointment because they couldn't afford to keep it up. It was full of beautiful paintings and so a dusty mess. Anyway, uh, we got back and when it was cleaning up, and we said, "Who in the world is Baba?" And she says, "Well, his dearest friend. She's the richest woman in Portugal." So and the stories go on and on. And I've run out
yeah,
of
it's
time.
time.
Right?
It is time. Anything more you want to say?
No, no. But we from then we just got into these bountiful things happen one after another, just unbelievable things. So that's it.
Thank you. And we're going to observe a minute of silence.
It's rambling, but that's part of the story. Much more.
Okay, so Jefferson has his hand up because he likes to have the first question.
Yes.
And I will be passing around the mic so that the recording will have both the question and the answer. And always remember, Bill has the opportunity to decline to answer any question. So, with that,
many people know something about Hawaii before the U.S. got involved.
Yeah.
But could you go into a little bit of the history of the Kingdom of Hawaii and how the U.S. got involved with that entire process and some of those details? Can
It's
you
hard
talk
to,
about that?
it's very, very complex. Hawaii was just discovered by Captain Cook, who got killed in Hawaii for good reason. Uh, and there was a minor king, uh, chief there, that got in contact with later expeditions. He got some people that jumped ship or his advisors. He was able to accumulate a lot of armor, fireworks, weapons from the ships coming in, and he was able to conquer the Big Island and that Maui and Molokai and Oahu. And in fact, eventually the king of Kauai surrendered to him. So Kamehameha uh, got control of all the islands. He died in 1819. And at that time, the old kapu taboo system was in a very strict system. Women could not eat with men. They could not eat bananas or pork. And if you had a very exalted aristocrat, if you got in their shadow, you could be executed. It had these horrible, horrible rules. And the his favorite wife and his son, who was to be the new monarch, observed that all these people coming on the expeditions did not observe these taboos, and nothing happened to them. So when Kamehameha died, women could not eat with men. So when Kamehameha died, Kahuma, his favorite wife, and Leo, the son that was now the king, got together and they had a meal together, and nothing happened to them. So Leo said, I'm going to dissolve all the old temples and burn up all the old statuary and get rid of this old Kaput system. This is 1990, so that happened, and Hawaiians were without religion. Just happened the next year, the missionaries arrived, and they came into a void, and they eventually took over and established schools for the elite, the aristocracy. In 1835, public schools were set up. So everybody learned to read and write. And by the early 60s, Hawaii had the most literate population of any country in the world, which we would never think of. And that was so that people could learn to read the Bible, which had been interpreted in Hawaiian, and so forth and so on. Uh, by then, the population of Hawaiians had went from about 600,000 to 800,000 people at the time of Captain Cook to 40,000 to the various diseases that came in that wiped out Aboriginal peoples everywhere. And sugar had started in 1835, and the plantations were run largely by Americans or descendants of Americans, and they did not like the monarchy. Uh, they wanted to become part of the U.S. because they could sell their sugar to the U.S. without tariffs and gave us advantages to others. Uh, the U.S. had a reciprocity agreement, as I mentioned, with the kingdom, and you got the use of Fort Island, Pearl Harbor, which I mentioned that were and Queen Liliuokalani came in and she wanted to restore the power of the aristocracy of the kingdom, which had been taken away by the legislature. It was like kind of powerless. And a group of Americans who were basically sugar planters related to that decided that they wanted to overthrow the monarchy. And it just so happened when they did this, there was a battleship with 200 Marines there, aboard American Marines. They came ashore. The group led by Laura Thurston, who was a descendant of the missionaries, came in, read a proclamation saying, "Your queen, you are now deposed, and we are now running the show." Uh, the Queen was imprisoned. There were attempts to to restore the monarchy, both in the U.S. and in Hawaii, and they all failed. And by 1890, 1898, we were absorbed into the U.S. as a possession, 1900 as a territory. And at that time, the monarchy was thrown out. All the monarchs lost all their property, and they were destitute. The Hawaiian language was suppressed. Everything had to be done in English then. Uh, and there was a continuous suppression of the Hawaiian culture. So when I came there in 1934, it was 40 or 50 years after the monarchy had been overthrown. And English then was the spoken language. Although if you went out to the rural villages on Oahu, Hawaiian was still the primary language. Hawaiians were never able to vote about being part of the U.S., although at the time we got statehood, there was a plebiscite, and the population was given a choice of remaining a territory, leaving the United States together, restoring the monarchy, and so forth. And overwhelmingly in that plebiscite, people voted to become part of the U.S. The reason, for several reasons, was that we couldn't elect our own governor. We had to pay taxes. We had to send men off to wars, but we had no vote in Congress, so therefore we never got involved with funding of projects and so forth. We're at the short end of the stick, and we thought it'd be best to be part of the U.S. That's what happened, how we became part of the U.S. Shortly, a lot more to the story.
Uh, yes, we came out in the 70s. Did you ever have a coming out
Pardon?
experience? We came out in the 70s,
Yeah,
came out of the closet. Okay.
yes.
Did you have that kind of experience, your partner and you? And then how did you end up in Liberty?
How did we up in Kansas City?
Oh, in
Well,
Kansas City. Okay.
when I met Marv, I knew nothing about being gay, knew nothing about gay couples. Knew nobody to talk to, so we just kind of started living together and worked things out. Eventually, we met a couple, Hiroshi Dugami and his partner Dick Hart, both artists, and they became our best friends. And we knew each other, partied together. It was 2 years before the GAY word was ever mentioned, and we're that closeted. Uh, when it came to retire, we realized we couldn't afford to stay in Hawaii. It was just too damn expensive. And I had a sister here, so we came to be here where we could travel, and being in the center of the country seemed like a good idea. And I love Kansas City, and Marv got to be sickly, and he died in the operating tables of St. Luke's in 2014. A blessing for him. He was quite ill. He would have been bedridden after that. So,
Good morning, Bill.
next question.
Yes, I have a question about race relations in Hawaii.
What?
Just race relations in Hawaii, then
Yeah.
and now. Is this on?
Yeah, I
Okay.
can hear you.
All right. Um, you know, we do have white privilege in the continental United States. And I'm wondering what has happened to Hawaii about race relations, given that when I read the book Hawaii, I was primed to believe it was a great melting pot. But is it really a melting pot, or does white power and white privilege
If you'll
exist?
pardon the language, Hawaiians are pissed off. Okay, they should be actually mad at the chiefs rather than the Howleys about all the land. The chiefs had vast areas of land that Kamehameha doled out when he took over the island. And quite often these chiefs had no interest in the land. It's just stuff that they owned, and they had to pay taxes on it. So when the sugar planters came in and to purchase land, they're very happy to sell the land to the sugar planters. Uh, but Hawaiians, and when that happened, the Hawaiians had no privilege in the old system. Hawaiians could have use of the land. They did not own it, but yet, well, the new owners, the to kick the people off the land because they didn't. So the Hawaiians were not too happy with the whole system. I can't explain much more. And there's still anger at Hawaiians who have lost everything pretty much. And most of them now are living in the mainland. They can't afford to stay in Hawaii. Or many of them are, I should say.
Two questions, Bill. Thank you for being here this morning. I had no idea that you had all of these experiences. Trying to remember what date the it came in to be one of our states. It seems like it was in the late 50s or early.
1959, I can't remember the
Yeah.
date.
Okay. And also, I was wondering if the presence of the America, those of us who live here in the United States, the Christian missionaries that we sent over there, uh, did they is the whole island pretty much like here as far as religion?
Yeah, I think by the 1840s, 1850s, Hawaii was pretty much Christianized. I failed to mention my partner, Mark Devereaux, was from a very prominent family. His father was a physician. His mother was in the legislature there for 14 years. And the next after me is another son, which was great. And Hawaii, being part of the Polynesia, where gays were accepted as just being part of the society, was not as judgmental as people here. So I've never felt threatened by being gay in Hawaii. Although we didn't live within the gay community, we lived outside of it. I've had a great life. It's hard to explain this all in an hour, less than an hour's time.
Thank you, Bill. You mentioned All Souls Honolulu, and I couldn't help but imagine All Souls full of surfer dudes. In Honolulu, England, and your travels, can you compare your Unitarian experiences, what you saw, different flavors?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Um, Honolulu All Souls, can you
Yeah.
compare what the Unitarians were
Yeah,
there like,
I
or in
never,
England, or anywhere in
no,
your
I wasn't
travels?
to All Souls until Marv died, and Dory Bader and Yvonne Jameson bought us here, bought me here, and I felt right at home immediately.
Oh, okay. Hang on, Carol. I have less of a question than perhaps a comment. You said that cockroaches don't have a heaven, and I had an apartment in college that would belie that fact. For me, not so much, but for them, yeah. All right, Carol.
I think I know Dave's question, or maybe I'm reading into it something about. I believe you said in Hawaii you got connected to an All Souls church there, and it may not have been Unitarian, but I think he was wanting to compare that place to us.
Well, I had no contact with it there. It wasn't until later on I learned that Obama's grandmother was part of that church.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much, Bill. Your stories are amazing. So I think you're going to get some dinner invitations out of this. I would love to hear more about your hobnobbing with the peerage of European nations. Oh my goodness. So,
Life is a crapshoot. We were just damn lucky, you know.
yeah, it really is. And just okay, Alex has a very quick question because we're almost out of time.
What was your parents' religion? Did
I,
they have any your parents, any religious
oh,
practices?
oh, they did the mandatory. We have to bring our kids to their church, and we went to churches in Honolulu and Kailua, where we lived. And that's where I learned that only Christians could go to heaven. And I thought about, I have these fine people that are Japanese Buddhists, the finest people in the world. Why would a loving God not let them in heaven? And that started my business of saying, okay, maybe that was not for me.
Fantastic question to have.
That was a good question.
I wondered the same when I was younger. So
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. See you next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Are we going to go to the other room?
Yeah, okay. All right. Now we go. Now we're
I've had a great life.
Which you it less jank? I mean, or did it just?
Oh, we just lived with it. But what we got there was so great. It was
Yeah. It's very. This is. Food.
Alex, I haven't responded to your email. Have you gotten any people? Yeah, it's such as starting to take work here. What's it called? Innovate. For members of Interweave back here in Fort Lee, Texas, and Jim, yes, it's always different thing. I don't know. You got different thing or it they're back, I think think about it. We've been so long together, just in all years. This one of and the big one with all its it's I don't know if you know, so I said, yeah. Tiny little things. And then when we were in Texas, we were I was literally the only one. Several of the different church organizations, or the Methodist and gay groups, they weren't done. Everybody meet separate. So we all met together at our church. So eight or nine, simply, but mostly we just went out. But we were fairly active politically too. So it's worthwhile. And well, everybody serious about when the street life choices is very like married. Think about the right food, right? That's everybody. Oh, you know, remember you're I would say still is our response. These other days it's really part of our honesty. I know we understand. I well, yeah. That's really, yeah. By the way,
we're having Richard Thomas over for dinner tonight. Last Sunday, he sat right there. You know, we had a boyfriend for a short time, and they broke up. And started looking for some. He says, maybe we get together sometime. I said, well, we got state colors in our condo, and we get together fairly often. And we were planning to have dinner with them, like, 4th of July. So Richard, come on over and be with us. So, you know, I don't know a whole lot about background, but we should get to know each other a lot better. You know? Oh, yes.
Quick comment, because last Sunday, somebody commented doing what hours. Yeah, that I was telling him too. Is he's talk about free will at the streets and we're trying to read there.
Oh, that,
We can do that.